what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Cinema Crusaders, the retro review edition. I'm your host, Nemesis. I'm so sorry that we took a little break there. I was a little bit under the weather, but we're back and ready to go. We are going to be talking about a great movie, uh, Unforgiven, by Clint Eastwood, won Best Picture in 1992. But before we get into that, I'd like to welcome my co host for today. You know him, you love him. He's the creator of Bob Non-Union Psychic, and he's the brain trust behind Warehouse 9 Limited. It's none other than Lance Lucero. How you doing, Lance?
Howdy. It's great to be here. It's been a while.
Yeah. I am so excited that you are back on here. I know that you are a big fan of the Western genre, so I'm glad that you were able to be here for this movie in particular. And I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it. So, you ready to get going?
Yeah, man, this is a great flick.
Cool. All right, so for all of you out there who don't know about this movie, just a little bit of introduction. Unforgiven is a movie produced and directed by Clint Eastwood. It also stars Clint Eastwood as well as a number of other people, including Morgan Freeman, Richard Harris, Gene Hackman, Jamie Wolcott, Sal Rubinek, I think is really wonderful in it, and a number of other people. I mean, just a really great cast. And I would venture to say this is probably one of the last great westerns put out by Hollywood. Do you think that's fair to say, Lance?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, and it's really interesting, especially that it comes from Clint Eastwood, because, his name is synonymous with westerns for a long time. And this movie, for a basic summary for the plot, Clint Eastwood plays a character named Bill Money, who has given up his sinful lifestyle, taken on the life of a farmer. His wife has died and left with 2 children, and he's on a pig farm. It's not the greatest existence in the world. And a kid comes looking for him, and they are going to avenge the assault of a prostitute up in Montana, I believe it is. And so he's looking for someone to help him, and they're going to go up there, and money is being offered for them to assassinate these cowboys that cut up a prostitute. And originally he's not going to take the deal, and eventually he goes and he brings in his partner, who is Morgan Freeman. They ran together, and the story goes from there, and we could talk a little bit more about it as we talk about the characters. But like I said, Morgan Freeman plays his partner. Sal Rubinek plays a journalist or an author. He's really, really great in this role. Gene Hackman, I think, really shines in this movie. And I have to give a special shout out. We're going to get more into depth in this, but to Richard Harris playing a character named English Bob. Absolutely fantastic. So before we get into, and you all know, those of you who are fans of the series know that what we do is we talk about cinematography, production value, we talk about the cast, and then we give our ratings out of 10 and how this movie would translate to a modern audience. But before we get into that, I wanted to throw it over to Lance and let you go ahead and give any thoughts you have on the movie as a whole, about the plot, what your general feeling is about this movie.
I think it is one of the, it's hard to believe already it's almost 30 years old. Time flies. And it is one of the last big, American Western movies that I think exists, and it is Clint Eastwood's last Western. He hadn't done one since.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to Unforgiven, you really see his directing skills just top notch. I mean, I think this is the pinnacle of his auteurship. Especially learning from guys like Sergio Leone and Don Siegel. You see you see his storytelling come together with ease. Of course, a great cast helps, but this is a story that isn't based off of quick shoot 'em up draws, Matrix style killings, Western in the Old West. It's a simple drama and a morality tale. And studying Clint Eastwood, you look back at his key Western movies that he directed himself, like High Plains Drifter, A Morality Tale, Avenging Angel, Outlaw Josie Wales. You see, the humanistic side come in of even cultures, Native American, females. He takes the Western in a different direction. It isn't a commercialized, overglossed version of what we've been conditioned to at times. I mean, it's rugged. It's always beautifully photographed. It's a lot more down to earth, and the characters shine more, even in their most heinous attributes. Doesn't matter if it's discrimination against females or racial greed. This is a movie that shines because all those elements are in it, and you don't expect that, flat out. Sometimes when people are conditioned, well, what is a Western? I better see some quick draws in the middle of town. I better see, horse chases. But this movie isn't like that. It unfolds with a morality tale. They know they're going to do something that they shouldn't be doing, but they're doing it for money. And does it really pay off in the end? Not really.
It's a slow burn movie as well, but once it gets going, even when it gets into the action, that is not the focus of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think what you're saying is interesting because speaking only for myself and my brother, who the two of us have watched this movie uh, dozens of times, we love this movie. This movie has that element that is part of a lot of the summer action movies where it's eminently quotable. There are so many great quotable lines in this movie. Um, and I think your morality tale hits right on the money because, not intended, but intended anyway, because William Money goes from being a man who was trying to turn his life around to just reverting back into his old ways. And you got to wonder, we never get the answer. When he goes back to find his children and they end up moving to San Francisco, how did he bury that part of him again? Because when he comes out of that saloon at the end and says, if I see any of you, I'm going to shoot you, shoot your dog, and burn your damn house down, you're like, holy crap. It's like,
It's
who is
real.
this? Yeah, it really is. And the thing is, for those of us who have grown up here out here in the West and have relatives who were part of the Old West, I know that I did, I believe you have as well, it feels real. It
Yeah.
feels like those stories where the line between lawman and outlaw was very thin and crossed all the time.
Right.
There, yeah, and that's what this movie brings, and that's one of the really cool things. It really is a slice of Americana from the Old West. It really feels that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sucks you in that way because the meek and mild money at the beginning of the movie, it's like Jekyll and Hyde when it happens. The light switch, it just flicks, and you see that he's more comfortable actually in that character than he was beforehand. It's almost too natural, even a quotable line. He's always been lucky when it comes to killing. You know what I
Mm,
mean? He just can do it. Not proud of it, but he's good at it.
yeah,
Um, and of course, Gene Hackman, that fine line between outlaw and lawman that he has to speak in a language some people understand, and it's brutal.
and I think one of the most, and I definitely want to hit on this when we get into the characters themselves. But I think one of the most memorable lines not uttered by Clint Eastwood is one of Billy the House, Gene Hackman's lines where he says, "I'm Billy the House. I wasn't supposed to die like this." It's like we all got it coming. It's like
Yeah,
it's just a great line, just absolutely incredible. And just to share a little bit of personal history, my great grandfather was one of the last people to rob a train in this country, but was also an Arizona marshal and a Nevada lawman, and was killed by a 14-year-old kid shot in the back. That's real, and that is the way this movie feels. And so it really took me back to that time. You know, pretty fantastic stuff. So what you were talking about, when William Money makes that transition, I kind of want to go to cinematography first because one of the things that that struck me about this movie is it's absolutely beautiful. You have wide shots of nature and everything, but you also, Clint Eastwood. I don't think he often gets the due that he deserves. It is ability to frame shots, and that time when he transitions from being the meek William Money to being the killer William Money is during a lightning storm, and the lighting in that moment, and then in the saloon is absolutely incredible. As a filmmaker, did this movie have any influence on you, and what do you think about not only the interior lighting but the wide shots that he did, the nature shots where we get to see another aspect of westerns that's kind of been lost, which is seeing people riding through the old west.
It's kind of funny because we have preconceived notions of what the old west looks like, and rightly so. We live here, and you look at the Unforgiven, and it's shot in Canada, and they're passing Canada off as the United States, and it always gives that when you go to a foreign place, even though it's still the United States, and you shoot an American Western, and you give it that little, that environmental spin, it's a little bit more ethereal, if you ask me. It's like you look at it and go, yeah, that is the West, but is it really the West? So I think that adds a little extra to the photography and the overall feel of the movie. Obviously they probably shot in Canada because it was cheaper, but it worked. And it looks different. It doesn't look like Wyoming, Montana. It doesn't. You can see that it's not, but it doesn't matter. It's the environment that counts. And then when we get into the interiors, when you have a good director of photography, and he's there to help you out, you're sitting pretty. And Clint Eastwood, of course, ups the bar because he's the actor and the director. So he's doing both at the same time and transitioning those cues. How actors do it, it's up to me to help them get there. It's up to me to help them get through that performance, but ultimately they create the character. So I could see how difficult that transition was, and we would only know how many takes it took. We'll never know how hard it was for him, but he's a trained professional and he nailed it. Because that is a Jekyll and Hyde moment that happens within, seconds, and you just see the change.
I have to say that going back and watching this movie again, it had been a couple years since the last time I had watched it. And so one of the things that really struck me, and the scene that I really wanted to break down from a filmmaker standpoint, and this is one of the great things when you are able to be on the podcast, is that I could pick your brain on this, is that fight scene in the saloon at the end of the movie. The thing that strikes me is it seems that it would be difficult to shoot and make it clear for the viewer to understand what's going on because it's in dimly lit conditions, first of all. So somehow or another they bring that off. That's the first thing I wanted to ask you about. The second part was, as you said, our preconceived notion of a Western gunfight is the quick cut, quick draw stuff where it makes it look like somebody is super fast on the draw and that stuff. And that deliberately wasn't part of this. In fact, it's part of the story where the gunfighter needs to take their time and be accurate. And in a day and age now when all fight scenes seem to be shaky cam, quick cut stuff that you can't tell what the heck is going on, here was a fight scene that we saw clearly everything going on, shot in a dimly lit interior, and we knew who killed who and when in a steady progression, and it just felt that much more authentic, and it drew you in more. So I wanted to pick your brain on kind of what I threw out there just now. What do you think about that? How do you think it was accomplished, and what have we lost that doesn't happen anymore?
Well, I think what it amounts to today is pretty much laziness. The quick cuts, the whip pans, shaky cams, it hides a lot. And it's distracting. So when you're distracting, you get through the action and then it's over with. Whereas something that's truly choreographed, like a dance, which is what that shootout was in that saloon,
Mm-hmm.
it's choreographed. And when you have the best of the best at your disposal, you're in a studio, you have the lights set up, you have the best cinematographer on the planet, you have performers that are top notch, it's going to happen. Um, but ultimately, it's up to the filmmaker to make sure that the audience can keep up. And if that doesn't happen, to me, it's a failure. And you see it so much. You see the techniques and the auteurships go out the window just for a cool shot, and that doesn't make the entire movie. Um, and of course, the pacing of the scene, like you said, there's no massive cuts and shaky cam. You can see the fear on a lot of people's face in that saloon. And as history has said, there was not a lot of shootouts in the Old West. It was somebody getting shot in the back or somebody walking straight up to a guy and just shooting him in the chest. And half the time, they didn't hit each other. They were shooting at each other, but they didn't hit anything. These guns weren't entirely accurate. This wasn't. The machinery was awesome, but it wasn't that perfect. And in the wrong hands, wrong things are going to happen. So, like you said, it took it to that realistic level of he's the only guy that took his time and knew what he was doing, whereas everybody else was too afraid to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Or they rushed too quickly and were missing. And unlike a Star Wars where the stormtroopers are missing constantly, and it seems it's a trope, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
This was believable because you were like, these guys are panicking, and so are firing wildly all over the place. Meanwhile, the man who keeps his head, because he's either a stone cold killer or drunk or both,
right,
is just mowing them down. You know.
Well, even when the journalist asks him, how did you know who to shoot first? How did you know what to do? And he explains it to him very calmly as he's drinking. This guy had scared eyes. This guy, he went through it perfectly. So he, like any professional, you assess your environment. You look to see who's standing where and who's nervous. It doesn't matter if it's a card game, a shootout, or a football game. You have to understand character in some way. And William Money, he knew how to kill people. That's just it. That's what he did and does.
And so did Little Bill, and it just that was the other thing. It was the luck of the draw. That Little Bill ended up getting killed. And he was probably the only one that could have held his own with William Money. So,
which always raises the question to me is that as a movie like this progresses, and there are certain vanities that Clint Eastwood doesn't have, in a lot of his movies. Watching this movie in the movie theater, it would have been believable if Clint Eastwood was killed in the end. You know what I mean? It would have been absolutely believable. And I often think, wow, that would have been a good story twist.
Or what I have heard, over the years is that when there were gun duels, more often than not, what happened is both people shot each other. So it was both of them killing each other, or both of them at least getting shot. So
yeah.
It's like the OK Corral. That's one of our big gunfight myths out here in the United States, but it really didn't go down the way it is. It really was almost like an ambush. So
right, and it was 40 seconds of shooting madness.
Yeah.
But this is a movie that as Clint Eastwood has done with his westerns, it's an art flick, but a highly commercial art flick.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people were necessarily ready for this when it came out, but I loved it. I was like, okay, this is really cool. This is something that's different and mean and beautiful.
See, and that's interesting that you brought that up, and I really want to talk about that when we talk about would this movie translate to a modern audience, because I was surprised this movie won Best Picture when it, back in 1992, and I think it was because it demanded your attention. It demanded the Academy's attention, and I'm curious when we get to that section of the pod, I'm curious to hear what you think about that. So. But let's get into the cast now, and I'm going to start with some of the minor characters and then work up to the larger characters, because even the minor characters in this movie play huge roles. One of the people I think that really carries this movie with her rage, while the other character carries the movie with her sense of forgiveness and gentleness, is the contrast between Frances Fisher as Strawberry Alice and Anna Thompson as Delilah Fitzgerald. I think that the contrast between those two personalities and the fact that Delilah is the one that got cut up, but she's much more willing to forgive versus Alice. All of the killing, everything that went on, was because Alice refused to let bygones be bygones. So I thought those two contrasting performances were amazing and added so much to the film.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny when you really look at characters in retrospect. They're in a terrible profession, and what do you expect? And then this happens, and yeah, I think that rage just had been boiling for years. I don't think this was just the tipping point, and it gets brutal. And I like how they progress the characters. They're doing a dangerous thing, but understand, as Skinny mentions later, the guy that owns the saloon, the whorehouse, and the women, he has signed contracts of them selling themselves to him. It's white slavery. He has a contract. He bought this gal from Boston and the expenses to get her here and all this stuff, and he's interested in recouping a dollar amount. He doesn't care about the woman.
And it shocks the soul when you hear them talking about that kind of thing so cavalierly. But once again, it feels real. It really feels realistic. And then just the simple fact that they call it billiards,
Right.
It's just, that is one of those idiosyncrasies. It really was around, it may not have been that particular name, but that was the kind of way that those things were referred to. Let's talk about that bartender, though, Skinny, for a second. I thought his performance was good as well, because at times he comes off as a proprietor, and other times he comes off as a slimy pimp,
Right.
And so when he eventually gets taken out, and then Clint Eastwood utters that great line, which is, you just shot an unarmed man. Well, I guess he should have armed himself. You're like, yeah, exactly. So.
Anthony James is a great character actor, and you've seen him all through the 70s, the 80s, and he's always playing that guy, and he plays it brilliantly. But I think as far as his performance in this movie go, this superseded a lot of his other performances because, as you said, they were so cavalier about selling flesh, and he thought about it 100% like a business. It wasn't like a corporation. The women are commodities, and that's all he cared about. And he played it so straight and perfect. It's brutal. It's absolutely shocking, but that's how it was in the day. We can't bury it. We can't deny it. We can't try to cover it up. That's history. But having said that, a woman willingly signing a contract that exploits herself. It's brutal. And I also, one thing I do like about a lot of Clint Eastwood movies is that he's if you noticed, he's not really into glamorous looking people. Putting it politely, faces that are landscapes, people that have character. And you don't go into the saloon house with the big red fluffy dresses and all the makeup, and it looks like they all just got out of a shower. No, you know what I mean? It's still outhouses. It's still pretty
dirty,
dank and dirty. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, well, I remember, this is going to be crude, but, once you brought it up, I got to mention it. It's like there's one scene where, Morgan Freeman and Clint Eastwood, and then the other guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I'm going to look it up in a second. But they arrive at the whorehouse, and they think, that they're there for the billiards. And so, just matter of factly, Silky Alice is throwing the talcum powder down below and then freshening up to, and it's just, it's stanky and dirty and lived in, and it feels very authentic, and it that makes the movie that much better.
I believe it does, and that grittiness is fun. I mean, the production value is amazing. The town they built for the movie is amazing, and then they have beautiful landscapes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the
Well,
dream, to have a town built for you so you can go shoot a Western, I mean, geez, that is the ultimate dream.
yeah. I mean, and there's so much to pick apart in this movie that we could do a podcast forever. But I think another thing that's fascinating was that, in this day and age, we talk about Second Amendment rights all the time and guns and everything, but not realizing that back then, when you enter Big Whiskey in this movie, the very first thing they say is, turn in your firearms. Well, that was
Right.
very common in the Old West.
It was very
You know,
common.
It was like, yeah, you could have your firearm when you're on your own ranch or something. You come into town, you turn your firearms in, otherwise the marshal or the sheriff's coming for you. So,
Right, and it's weird how people invent, or I guess to correct myself, nowadays how people invent their own realities. It's all about the internet. I'm going to invent my reality or rewrite something and call it truth. And when people agree with me on whatever social platform, oh, then I must be right. And then, like you said, yeah, there were many a town you couldn't take a gun. You couldn't take a gun into town. They'd stop you. It was truly illegal. They'd throw you in the can or kick you out. So in a sense, it was kind of civilized because it maintained the peace. Uh, and Gene Hackman played it to the letter. I mean, he didn't bend. He didn't. He didn't turn around on his own law. He wasn't scared. He's going to uphold the law and make an example of people, and that's what he did.
now, I think it's interesting what you said about our reality because I think the character. I don't know if Clint Eastwood meant it this way, but I read it this way. The more I've watched the movie, I may be putting my own views on it, but the character of Sal Rubinek, who plays the journalist, um, to me, that is us. That's in a weird sort of way, that's us now and our romanticized view of the Old
Right.
West. And very much so back then. The people that were living on the East Coast, that was how they viewed the West as well. But we're the same way now in that they were talking about the duck of death and all that other stuff, and it was a reality that never existed. And Clint Eastwood gave us the reality which did exist, or at least as much as he could in a Hollywood film.
Right, and it's weird how it transcends when you think about the penny novels, the penny dreadful novels that they were reading about the Duke of Death, and how even he himself romanticized what he was not. He carried the journalist with him, and this is my lifestyle. How fake was he? We find out he was just a racist that murdered Chinese immigrants.
For the railroad.
For the railroad to boot.
Yeah.
And these are brilliant little story elements that are put in that transcend a character. It's just not a guy wearing a black hat or a white hat. It isn't the hooker with a heart of gold. I mean, these people have problems, and they're in a heinous environment. You know what I mean? As sexy as the Old West looks and the art and the fashions, there's no way in heck I'd want to be there. You know what I mean? It was terrible.
And I think, let's get into that character, the Duke of Death, the Richard Harris character. I think what's fascinating about that is that right away, it makes the character, Gene Hackman's character of Little Bill, more gray. So that when he dies, yeah, we are glad that he was the one that ended up dying to a certain extent, but it's not a black and white situation, just like the Old West wasn't a black and white situation.
Right.
And when he beat the heck out of I can't remember the English Bob, of English Bob, he deserved it.
He deserved it.
But it was brutal as all get out. So really amazing storytelling, like you were saying.
Poignant violence is what I call it. Not shooting 50 people in an Old West town, which is redundant and boring, and okay, it's desensitizing. But the slow, brutal beating that he gives, Richard Harrison, is poignant,
Hmm.
and he gave him every chance not to get beaten. But there's the stubbornness and pride of such a cavalier character.
And then the most amazing scene between those two was when he has Sal Rubinek's character offer Bob the gun.
Right.
And and Bob, you can see it in Bob's eyes that Bob knows that if he takes that gun, he's a dead man.
Yep.
He,
And the exploitation of the journalist. He's just there to exploit it. Like having an iPhone and purposely instigating something so you can post it and get a million hits. It goes backwards. He was doing the same thing. If he witnessed it and write it, then he will make it truth to the literary world, the people that can read,
right.
and making probably himself what he thinks it might be a literary legend. So everybody has an ulterior motive in this movie, and I think that's what makes good storytelling. Is like, okay, your characters, you need to give them something. If you don't give your characters something, why should you even care or want to know what happens to them?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because one of the things we are comic crusaders. We talk about comics all the time. I think there's a place for the black and white mythology. Sometimes we need that, but if you're going to do something gritty and realistic, then you need to do something gritty and realistic where there are no all good or all bad characters. It's people living in a world. And like we were talking about with Little Bill, on the one hand, when he beats English Bob, we're like, okay, he deserved that. But then he beats Ned to death. And Ned was just going back. Ned didn't kill anybody. I mean, he was an accessory to murder, if we want to be perfectly honest about it.
Right.
But he didn't kill anybody, and they beat the man to death, and then put his corpse in front of the saloon. So once that right there pushes the character of Little Bill in a different direction for the audience. So it's like there's so many layers to that, and this, as a storyteller, Clint Eastwood is taking us on this journey where we don't know how to feel about Little Bill.
Right. Which to me is good character development, because I think if you keep the audience guessing, but you still have, I mean, come on, Gene Hackman's awesome. I would love just to have him read a Taco Bell menu, and it would probably sound delicious. You know what I mean? I mean, the guy is that actor, and you can't imagine anybody else playing him,
Mm-hmm.
that character, and because it's so perfect. And this is one of those films that is near perfect. You can watch it over and over again and still find layers. Yeah, he kills Ned. He kills Morgan Freeman, that milky voice that everybody loves. Mr. Electric Company. You know what I mean? He taught a generation to read, and then he's this fine actor. And there's that
He killed
sympathy.
God. He killed
Yeah,
God.
he killed God. I mean, yeah, that's hilarious, and put him on display. I will not tolerate assassins.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And let the little kids see, let everybody see, because not in my town, and I think that's brutal. That's law,
Yeah.
and
And
it works for the most part.
and let's be honest. I mean, it's probably something that you would want to avoid, and maybe this will be something that comes up when we talk about modern audiences. But the idea of an old west sheriff beating a black man to death, a freed black man to death, and then putting his body on display is a little hard to watch. But it made the movie that much better.
It did, because I mean, you see a prostitute get her face cut up. You see brutal murders,
Mm-hmm.
and then you see guys think about it. You know what I mean? You live with it now. So that's great storytelling.
Yeah. Now, before we get to the last character that I want to talk about, and then I'm gonna any other characters that you want to bring in, obviously we could do that as well. Let's get to the partner, the kid. I forget his name, and I am going to look now real quick. James Woolvett playing the Schofield kid.
Right.
right off the bat, I have to say that I always mix this character up because I think he's who is the character for that played the journalist from Interview with the Vampire?
Oh, you're thinking Christian Slater, Young
Yeah,
Guns 2, Arkansas Dave Rudabaugh.
yeah. He
Well,
doesn't he look like Christian Slater?
there was a hint of it.
Yeah.
There was a hint of Arkansas Dave Rudabaugh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so every time I watch this movie, it's just I have to do a double take because I think it's Christian Slater and they're playing the character. But um, I think this character is fascinating as well, and he doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, but at the same time, I think that he is wonderful because you can contrast him. He's a poser. I mean, that's what he is, and
100%.
and you contrast him against the Stone Cold Killer, and you're like, when he leaves, when he breaks down and cries, you have hope that maybe he'll turn his life around because this is not the life for him. He is not cut out to be the killer, and if he does become a killer, he's going to lose his soul, you know. And I think that's just incredible, you know. So for the short amount of time he's in there and with Ned and with William Money, I think we get a real glimpse into the danger he is in from a spiritual perspective. So,
All about money. You know, it's all about making a little bit of money. And is this the easy way to make money? Assassination. You know, it may sound easy,
mm-hmm.
but he's a great catalyst. You know, he shows up at William Money's door. You know, they and then you could see how stories transcend, how truth is blurred. Oh, they cut up a hooker, they gouged out her eyes, and they cut off her nose and ears, and you know, it's more heinous than what it really is. So it's a more of a motivator because what is truth? Once again, you know, as Jean Paul Sartre says, beware of storytelling because as it translates, stories can perpetuate to something they're not.
You know what the amazing part about that is that your part about the story about the what happened to the hooker, it just keeps getting embellished more and more. But the one story that we find out, the exploits that we find out, are not embellished. In fact, if anything, they have been downgraded. Are the exploits of William Money's ruthlessness and killing?
Yeah,
You know, because the kid is asking, "Did you really do all those things?" And he's like, "Yeah, he really did." And worse, you know, and it's like,
right.
wow, it's really telling.
It is, and you know that's what makes it great. And you know, it's one of those things too that watching documentaries on the film and interviews how the making of the movie itself or how it came to fruition was a slow burn because Clint Eastwood had this script from what I think in his possession for over 10 years, but he felt he was not the right age to play the character.
Wow.
So it simmered on his desk forever until he was like, okay, I'm going to make this script. And I think the original, well, this might have to be looked up, but I think the original name of the script was The Cut Face Whore. And of course, they changed the name because, I don't think you could put that on a marquee. Uh,
I think the casting of Morgan Freeman was inspired as well because there's something about the man's presence and his voice. But in this movie, it kind of feels like Red from The Shawshank Redemption, where in his youth he may have been intemperate and violent, but he has a sense of gentleness to him where, yeah, they're going to assassinate these guys, but he just couldn't do it. And it comes off as totally believable, so that when he's beaten to death, it's just horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And I can't imagine this movie being successful without Morgan Freeman being in it, or as successful. It still could have been successful, but I don't think it would have been the same.
I think all the elements came together to make that movie. That to me, as far as Clint Eastwood's directed a lot of great movies,
Hmm.
poignant movies that are going to hopefully have an impact forever. But this particular one is the one I think that it not because of Academy Awards and those accolades, but are those laurels. It's because he had the patience as a auteur to say, no, I'll make this movie when I'm absolutely ready to make it. And when it happened, hey, you don't rush it. You make it as best as you can, and then you throw it out to the world. And he did that.
So before we get to Clint Eastwood's character, are there any other characters that we've not talked about that you would like to talk about?
I think we pretty much hit the big players.
Okay.
I mean, with the cast like Clint Eastwood, Gene Hackman, Morgan Freeman, Richard Harris. I mean, uh, and the fillers of the actors. I think we pretty much nailed it. But I'll shout out to Anthony James again, though. An underrated character actor that his face just in any movie, there's that guy. You know what I mean? Oh, there's that dude. And shout out
Yeah.
to him. Great performance as Skinny.
All right. So let's hit Clint Eastwood's character now. One of the things that always tickles my brain is, in my mind, I like to see if I could somehow connect William Money in this movie to the man with no name from, the spaghetti westerns. And I don't think that they're tied together, but at the same time, I think you could twist it so it was that guy, that was his real name, eventually was William Money, which I think is interesting. But then, so I kind of go back and forth to that character, but this character, it is so fascinating to me that Clint Eastwood was able to bring a performance where the man who is on the pig farm dealing with pigs that are sick and dying and is raising two children looks like he's one step out of the grave. And then he comes to life and looks to be reinvigorated and ready to tackle life on his own terms when he begins killing again. I don't know what that says. There are a lot of things I think it says, but as a performance, I think it's pretty fascinating. And I think once again, I think Clint Eastwood is very underrated by a lot of people, unfortunately.
Agreed. And you look at the Man with No Name series, Sergio Leone. That's all you have to say. And the grandness of it all, and the beauty of it all, the operatic, cinematic display of it all. It's all imagery with one-dimensional characters, and it works. It's genius. And I think that Clint Eastwood, one of his mentors being Don Siegel, he took that more toned down, independent, a little bit more in your face storytelling rather than the grandness of all the landscapes and big gigantic music. He took that more personal route. And High Plains Drifter is a personal movie. Avenging Angel takes place in a little town. Uh, you see how he tries to develop these characters, coming back to life to get revenge because people are dirtbags. Uh, whatever he's directing, I think he usually goes for that character element, a little bit more hardcore. But sometimes you see actor directors do that a little bit more than normal directors who sometimes don't understand that craft, and it's a hard thing to understand. There are times where I don't understand how performers get to where they're going. I just try to help them get there, and the moment I see it, that's it. I got it.
Someone asked me once to describe William Money, in terms of Clint Eastwood's acting history. To me, it's almost like he took two of his most iconic roles and combined them in The Man with No Name and Dirty Harry Callahan, and put them together and came up with something new, And I think it's interesting because I think he's defined by those roles, and I don't think that's really fair to him because, let's be honest, those are really like you were saying, they are one-dimensional roles, and he kind of got pigeonholed into them. And then he did some other stuff, earlier in his career. What's the one with the monkey?
Every which way but loose. And
Yeah,
those are
yeah,
fun.
yeah. So he was doing all these things, but but he has a lot of range. He has a lot to bring as an actor and as a director. So I think that one of the best things to come out of this movie was that his true talent was put on display for another generation and will live on, you know, whenever he leaves us. May that not be for a long time. So
He's still rocking, man. What's his new movie called? It's coming out. He's got a new flick.
yeah, I'm not sure what it is. I mean, he's done. What did he do? $1 Million Baby and
Right.
um, just a bunch of stuff. I mean,
He, I think it's got a weird title. Oh, Cry Macho.
huh?
I don't. Now this is just after the Mule.
Yeah, the
Um,
last movie of his I saw was The Mule, so which was good.
yeah, I mean the guy's got a track record. That's well, he's 91 years old. He's
Yeah,
got a track record, and he started young, and he learned from the best. And it's a bygone age. It is bygone, and that's what's terrifying me the most about the future of cinema is that we're going to lose. We're going to see a lot go away. Our generation, and we can't just accept what's thrown at us now as cinema. We just can't accept it.
before we get into how this movie would translate for modern audiences, I do want to mention, um, you talk a lot about shooting on film, and I think this is another great example of film being superior in many ways to digital and digital effects. If this movie was CGI'd, it would not have the same grand scope and feel that it has. If the interior scenes were all composites and not practical effects and everything else that went with it, it wouldn't feel real and lived in and authentic. So I think there's, and that's not to say that CGI does not have its place at times, for a variety of different reasons. It does. But I think we need to start looking backwards more. And I've always felt that way to a certain extent. And then the more you've talked about film and everything, I mean, you've converted me on that one. I look at it and it's like, I think there's a time and place to do digital, but film can be absolutely beautiful when you're trying to pull things off like this. And I don't think this movie would be the same without the way, if it wasn't shot the way it was shot.
Right. Digital has its place. I'm not going to deny that at all. Cinematically, I'll always question it. Um, uh, but once again, here's a movie that his canvas is film,
Mm-hmm.
and all those iconic westerns we talked about. We could talk about tons of different westerns, even Dirty Harry, all this stuff. There's a way that film adds depth to your characters rather than making them look plastic. Um, there's a depth to it, and this is a perfect example of wow. Here's your depth. This is one of thousands of examples, but it's
I
beautiful.
think it, I think it really stands out in those natural landscapes, though. At least in this movie, it does. I can't imagine this movie not being shot on film and looking the same. I just can't. It doesn't seem like it would be possible.
It's not possible, and I know that will anger a lot of people. I mean, you can't fake it till you make it. Um, it's not possible. You pick one format or the other. You don't make one format look like the other or try to. You just pick your format. If that's your format, go for it. Fine. Do the best you possibly can with it, but don't fake it. Don't try to make it look like something it's not.
Well, I think one of the things that's unfortunate, and this is not just in this industry, but in society, is that once we latch on to what is supposedly the next big thing, we throw away everything that came before. When we don't realize that sometimes what came before is as good, if not superior, than what the next big thing is. Perfect example of that is the discovering of vinyl for music. You know, um, you get something from vinyl that you don't get from CDs, and definitely don't get from MP3s. You know,
Absolutely.
so I think that's a cautionary tale for all of us as we go forward. You know, this is even happening in comic books now. You know, with digital comics. You know, and they're saying that print comics are going to go away. It's like there's a place for digital comics. There's a lot of reason to have digital comics, but you can't replace the visceral feeling of holding an actual book in your hand. You know, and looking at it and experiencing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The chemical process versus the electronic process, they're two different things.
Hmm.
And they both have their place in the world. Um, but, when you look at a film like Unforgiven, and you look at an auteur like Clint Eastwood, it's inspiring, and it should be. You should want to try to achieve that and use the tools that they use, which are still perfectly sound today. I mean, tried and true. They'll last forever. It's not disposable like a lot of things are today. Everything's so disposable. No, no. These cameras, they'll last a lifetime. You take care of them, and you'll create images in cinema that's going to outlast you. You know,
Yeah.
and to me, that's what it's about.
And there's even ways to do the things that we so casually do in CGI on film. You know, one of my favorite YouTube shows I watch all the time is a channel that looks at bad. It's called one of their shows is called Bad and Great CGI, but they look at old visual effects as well, and they're always fascinated by the fact that I think the latest one I looked at was the Wizard of Oz and the way they came up with the effects in the Wizard of Oz in 1939. You
Hmm.
know, and it's all photographic trickery and practical effects and a whole host of other things, but that movie still holds up pretty well, you know, and it's coming up on what is it, 80 years old now, something
Oh
or
yeah,
more.
more,
So
more.
yeah,
Yeah, it's there's a craft out there, and I get it. I get it. A lot of the CGI stuff is fun, and yeah, a guy can sit in his basement, a person can sit in their basement and make a whole little city and all kinds of neat things. But I always say, in the grand scheme of things, hey, that's pretty cool, but how do you incorporate that into a story? A cool shot doesn't make a story.
mm-hmm.
And I get it. We can do a lot of cool things, and there is a way to marry certain aspects of digital to film, because optical effects have gone away, so it has switched to digital. So there is a way to marry it, and with awesome lenses and great film stock. People talk film grain. Oh, film grain. Well, when you got the best of the best, you don't see film grain. It's just an amazing image that people can understand. Well, how is it like that? Well, it's a chemical process. So the Unforgiven, that's why those depths in color look so great, especially in the saloon when the lightning's going off and you have oil lamps burning. Of course, there's it's lighting, it's a studio, but that's remanufactured at its best. I mean, you could see the pores in their skin.
Mm-hmm.
When you're watching a Blu-ray, you could see the scruff on their face. I mean, the image is that great. And of course, when you have faces like Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman and Morgan Freeman, you're going to get more out of it, because that's work of art. It is just not a pretty person that's made up to look rough.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But
Fun stuff.
those real blacks and that flickering light and the torchlight off of Ned's corpse, you know, if you haven't seen this movie, you owe it to yourself to pick it up and check it out, because on top of the great performance and the great storytelling, just the look of the film across multiple different scenes is amazing.
Yeah, yeah, great film.
So let's talk about, for a modern audience, how we think this movie would translate. And I'm gonna go ahead and kick it off to you first, because I've been talking a lot. So
We got a lot to talk about.
yeah.
This is important. But I think sometimes I don't have a lot of hope for modern movie watchers. The distractions and the pacing that they need um, sometimes has nothing to do with storytelling. It's just about the next action sequence. But a movie like this, if anybody wants to be a movie maker, this is a movie you watch. I think it's a case study, not just cinema, but a case study. Um, I think all the morality of it translates perfectly to what's happening today. Everything that's in this movie is heinous, and people see worse things on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
that people have recorded on their phones or what have you. So I don't think it's shocking. I don't think it's gratuitous, but the way that it's presented is thought provoking. And dare I say it, if a person thinks while watching a movie, some people get a little disturbed by that. No, this is you want when someone walks away from your movie, you want them to remember it and not just go, oh, did I see that? Is that movie with the great action sequence? Is that no? You want them to remember it. You want them to remember. I mean, the image of her face cut up, the makeup they did on that is like, gosh, it's hard to look at,
Yeah.
but it's effective. Um, Audiences today, I think this is kind of a case study. Sit down and watch this movie, but will they make it past the first 20 minutes? I'm not sure.
Mm. I think I think this movie is important for audiences today. I think people that haven't seen this movie or younger generation owe it to themselves to watch it for a couple reasons. First of all, just because, like you said, if you want to be a filmmaker, I think this is a movie to study. This is a way, if you want to be a person that writes scripts or stories and wants to learn about how to develop characters and give them depth without having to go into every little backstory a la Quentin Tarantino, where you have 25 different, side plots, uh, this is a movie to watch, and that's not a dig on Tarantino necessarily. That's his style of filmmaking, but it can get tiresome after a while sometimes. Um, but I also think it's important because one of the things we talk about today is being truthful about our history. Well, if you want something that's truthful about the reality that was the Old West, this is that movie. This isn't the movie where you had people in black hats and white hats. This is the Old West presented, I would say, fairly realistically in all its ugliness and glory at the same time. And even to the extent where we have a freed African American married to a Native American woman, which was common back then, um, and the way they were treated, and the fact that they had to live outside of town and everything else. The only thing that I worry about with modern audiences watching a movie like this is that it's important to take this in and digest it, but then I'm afraid that people will be judgmental, and it's like about a time and a place that is so far removed from where we live now. I think it's important to see the truth and to understand it from a historical perspective, and then understand the art and take that in as well. But you need to put it into context, and so I think that's why it's important for modern audiences. I think we need more storytelling like this, but at the same time, I think we need to have some perspective when we are given these stories. It's kind of like the movie Glory, which I would love to do sometime and talk about. Another great movie that presents some fairly disturbing realities about Union soldiers and everything else with the Civil War, without pulling any punches. And I think it's an important movie, and I definitely would like to get to that movie sometime because I think it presents a lot of different sides of a very nuanced and complex subject. And you need to be able to look at that and then put it into historical perspective and context. And one of the things that bothers me about modern Hollywood, and why I'm not exactly hopeful that they would make a movie like this, is because they wouldn't present it as is. Just give you the raw ugliness of the movie and let you digest it and think about it on your own and make up your own mind. Instead, whenever they do a project like this, somebody's politics, somebody's point of view has to be laid right over the top of it and force fed to you. And I think that's unfortunate because one of the great things about this movie is that Clint Eastwood just gives it to you. He just gives it to you on full blast, and you can do with it what you will. And I think that's important. I think that's important for all of us in a number of different ways.
Agreed, and that's that's the age we live in right now for this moment of politics transcending art and people rewriting history or even language.
Hmm.
And it's like, if you're writing some kind of historical period piece and there's racial or sexual subject matters, um, you can't water that down. It's been done before,
Hmm.
uh, and I think it hurts. It hurts the movie in general. You got to play that game very, very, very carefully.
But
Um,
I contrast that with the discussion that we've had here in this, little podcast that we do because we enjoy it. We love cinema and everything, but we hit on some pretty deep topics and had a good conversation about some real things, and Clint Eastwood didn't have to force feed that to us, and it's like I'm hopeful that one day we'll get back to that, because
that's a goal of mine.
yeah,
It's a goal of mine. There's fun. You can have fun. You can make cinema. You can do all that. But still, your story shouldn't be hindered by the politics of today. And some studios that choose to do that are only hurting themselves in the long run.
yeah.
People are starting to see through it. I think audiences are getting jaded in a different way.
I agree. And one of the things I remember when we were, coming up, when we were growing up, was one of the great things was, if you were analyzing a poem or a play or something, and you had 20 people, you could have 20 different opinions on what it meant, and they could all be valid. As long as you could, what you were taking out of the art was valid. The art was there to mean something to you personally and bring something out, and there was no necessarily right or wrong answer. And too often nowadays, especially with social media, if you take the wrong message out of a movie or something, or you take your own message, I say wrong, I mean that's even the wrong thing to say. You're pilloried for it.
And even doing our cool little podcast like this, I mean, we're on the firing line,
Hmm.
whether we like it or not. Even we're appreciating this awesome movie, but there are many people that, if they took the time to watch our cool podcast, they would understand that we're not here to be offensive. We're here to say, hey, this isn't an analytical approach to a film that we recommend, um,
Hmm.
versus a shout out on a social media platform that will create a hate rant or a debate that means nothing.
Hmm.
Um, there's a validness. I mean, we're pro cinema, so watch this movie. It's cool.
Yeah.
Bottom line, if anybody had anything to say, hey, ever seen Unforgiven? Yeah, watch it. It's cool. That's all I would say. I wouldn't go into any detail. Yeah, hey, Gene Hackman, Clint
Yeah.
Eastwood, these are the dudes. Go for it.
And
That's it.
even if all you get out of it is the quotable lines, you'll still have a great time watching the movie. You know, and then maybe it'll bring you back for another viewing, and you'll get another layer out of it, like you're talking about. Because this is one of those rare movies where, like you said, you can watch it multiple times, and each time find something else to take from it that enriches your experience. So
Right, and that's cinema.
cool. All right, so as always, the last thing we do is we rate the movie out of 10. Um, I'll go ahead and kick it off. Man, I am always so loath to give out a 10 out of 10, because I'm always
Right.
worried that the next movie is going to be, I'm going to run into something that's better. This movie's pretty close for me. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10, just because I usually don't give full marks, but it's up there. It's definitely up there for me. How
Um,
about you?
it's yeah, it's tough. It's tough when you look at near perfection. It's hard to just haphazardly throw out a 10, but I'll go for the 9.5 as well.
Cool.
You know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
yeah, it's a weird thing.
And usually we're pretty right on with IMD. We're a little bit higher than they are. They're at an 8.2, but even for IMDb, that's a pretty darn high score. I think a lot of people might be turned off by some of the more distasteful elements in this movie. And that's fine. If that's not your cup of tea and you watch it, even if you don't enjoy it, it's worth watching just to experience it, you know, and then maybe put it aside. So,
Exactly.
um, this has been a great podcast, really enjoyable. I do want to announce to everybody out there we will be back in 2 weeks, and the next movie we're going to watch is from 1989. It's a movie called Heathers. I believe it has Winona Ryder in it, among others.
Christian Slater.
Um, Christian Slater. I have never seen this movie, so this will be a new one
It's
for
a fun
me.
movie. It's a fun movie.
Uh, I read the description of the movie. Um, this movie came out when I was a senior in high school, and I remember the name, and I was like, I don't want to watch some chick flick, you know. I thought that's what it was, and then I read the description. I was like, oh, well,
It's
that
not.
sounds, yeah, that sounds good. So,
This was a sleeper that hit me over the head, you know, in 1988. I'm like, what is this? Is awesome, you know.
cool.
Once again, it'll be a film that the discussion will be, will it fit today? Because there's some heinous subject matter in this movie,
Well,
I think it's relevant, just like I think Unforgiven is relevant. Uh,
cool.
it's going to be fun.
I'm looking forward to watching it, and definitely looking forward to talking about it. It'll be cool to watch a movie I haven't seen before and talk about, so that'll be really fun, you know. So anyway, thank you very much for being on the pod with me, Lance. It was great.
Thanks for having me. This is great. It's good to be back.
Yeah, and we're going to continue bringing these to you. And if you have any suggestions for movies that you would like to do, just remember that our criteria: the movie has to be at least 10 years old. But if you do, DM us, send us our comment in the comment section down below. Hit like and subscribe for us as well. And on behalf of myself and Lance, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Cinema Crusaders.
See you next time.